Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Film Florida podcast. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.22 for our 2022 fundraising campaign. We also have a Film Florida merchandise page. Visit filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. Vincent Martella is an actor best known as the voice of Phineas Flynn in the Disney Channel animated series Phineas and Ferb. In addition to the 130 episodes of Phineas and Ferb and the dozens of spin-offs, movies, and games, Vincent has worked with the likes of Pamela Anderson, Rob Schneider, Bill Engvall, Billy Ray Cyrus, and Kevin Costner, just to name a few. He was also in all 88 episodes over 4 seasons of the series Everybody Hates Chris, and has been in multiple episodes of The Walking Dead. We talked to Vincent about those projects, getting involved in acting at an early age, and our paths crossing in the mid-2000s when he was a resident of Central Florida. On this episode of the Film Florida podcast, here's my conversation with Vincent Martella. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Vincent.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I usually like to start with our guest's origin story, but there's not a whole lot of time between when you were born and when you started in the industry. So you were originally born in Rochester, New York, but you moved to Florida pretty early, right? Why did your family move here?
My father and mother had already spent a lot of time in Florida. They met in Florida, actually. Like, they were both from Rochester, New York, but met in Florida under different circumstances.
Fun.
And so they always knew they wanted to move there. And the timing wise, because I have older siblings too, the timing was kind of, okay, if we move right now, and I think I was about like 2 or 3, if we move right now, it'll be right before the kids are about to get into school and like start kindergarten and make friends. So they decided they'd rather do it then. And so we moved to Central Florida, moved to DeLand in Volusia County. And I grew up in DeLand, Florida. I was there, from 2 or 3 until 18. I mean, I was back and forth from LA in a period in between there that I'm sure we're going to discuss. But but yeah, I spent really all my growing up in Central Florida.
And you graduated from DeLand High School, right?
I did. Yeah, I graduated from DeLand High School. Go Bulldogs. I think last year was my 10-year anniversary, which is crazy because time just seems meaningless at this point, especially in COVID years. But yeah, I just recently was actually back in Central Florida for a couple of days, and I hadn't been there in like 10 years. It was really weird because most of my family had moved to different parts of the country by the time that I was, graduating high school and leaving. My parents moved out of Florida too, so I didn't go back to that area of Florida that often. I'd been back to Orlando a couple of times, but I hadn't been to specifically DeLand, Florida. So it was a very weird experience coming back after so much time.
Now, you jumped into the entertainment industry really early with live performances and commercials. Do you remember actually wanting to get into acting, or is that something your parents kind of started for you and you just kind of went along?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, anybody who's a child actor, your parents have to be involved in that somehow. You don't have nearly the agency to be like, this is my career now. But it was honestly because a teacher had recommended that I start doing some acting classes and things like that, because I was so outgoing and liked telling jokes and was trying to be like a class clown type of person. And that's kind of when I started doing commercials and stuff, because in Orlando I went to an acting school there, and as a kid, I was like 8 or 9, and I just done like local theater stuff. In those acting classes, it was like, if you're good enough in the acting class, we'll give you an agent, and all of the work for children, especially in Florida, is commercial work.
Right.
And so I would just book random commercials in Orlando and Tampa, and I would be shooting these commercials just on weird school days where I'd miss school. And it was just really a stepping stone sort of thing, as it is for a lot of people in the industry, where it was like, now I'm doing commercials for X amount of time. That's gotten me enough exposure that now a bigger agency wants to go, hey, do you want to do TV and film? And that just kind of is a stepping stone just career wise. I feel like I just started mine probably 10 years earlier than most people decide they want to become an actor or want to pursue that. But then that also becomes, I think it's like a new like personal decision then, when you're like 18 and a person and you become, an adult. I remember very specifically thinking to myself in the middle of like my high school years, this is something I want to take much more seriously. Like, I don't want this to just be some sort of hobby that I had when I was a kid. I want to get better at this. I want to work on more things and make better connections. And I want to really make this my life. So it was kind of like a new decision that I feel like people probably make when they become an adult again. So kind of a mixture, I guess, of different influences there.
And you mentioned, getting into some film and television, and some of your early credits, early credits, are a pilot with Pam Anderson and a film with Rob Schneider before you were even a teenager, I think. So you just jumped right into things. Do you remember much about that audition process being so young? Did you really even know what was going on?
Yeah, so the way that kind of timed out was that was right when I had started. There was like a 2 year kind of stint where I left Los Angeles to go to California for pilot season. And for any of your listeners who don't know what that is, that used to be a time in the beginning of the year, really like late January through like about April, when all of the new TV shows cast their roles. So I went out to Los Angeles for that, and I did well. I booked like recurring roles on Nickelodeon TV shows and things like that, and like a
Hmm.
Fox sitcom, I think. And it was right after that then I did the Rob Schneider movie, the Deuce Bigelow movie, which was I do remember that audition process because it was like at the same place I'd booked a lot of commercials, and so the casting director like knew me pretty well. That also shot in Europe, which is crazy. I was
Yep.
also like a preteen going to Europe. I really had no business, spending like a week in Spain. I was on a beach in Spain for like a week as like an 11, 12 year old. But the Pamela Anderson show that you're talking about, Stacked, that actually happened a little bit after that, because the day that I was filming the Pam Anderson show, because it was an actual live show with an audience, and that's actually the only time I've ever done that.
Hmm.
We were gonna film that night, and that was the same day I was screen testing at studio for Everybody Hates Chris,
Oh.
which is the show that I would then go on to work on for the rest of my teen years almost, and like the main sitcom that I worked on in my life. And so it was the same day, and I had to make a decision when I got Everybody Hates Chris, like the following weekish. Both shows were like, "Hey, we want you to be a regular on our show," and I said no to the Pamela Anderson the Fox show because I wanted to do the Chris Rock show, and it ended up being a much better decision,
Right.
career wise, obviously. But I was just more excited about the Chris Rock show, and it was a lot funnier. I like Chris Rock a lot as a comedian, and so I was just really excited and passionate to do that. So I ended up going that direction instead of doing the Pamela Anderson show, which I think only lasted like one season. It was pretty short.
Yeah, you definitely made the right decision now, and because you ended
Yeah.
up playing Greg for 88 episodes of Everybody Hates Chris. Like, tell us about those couple of years. I mean, I'm sure that was pretty wild.
Yeah, and it ends up being something. What's crazy is like the way that everyone's life works this way. Obviously, it's just mine happens to have a TV show involved in my kind of formative like teen years. But you appreciate things about it when it's happening, and you go, "Wow, this is really cool. I'm learning a lot." But then when you get older, you certainly appreciate other levels of, "Wow, I didn't even realize I was learning this stuff from these experiences." And that's kind of how I feel about it. It was a really awesome school of like the industry for me, because not only did I learn a lot about performing, about acting, about comedy specifically, I ended up becoming really good friends with the writers on that show, and the PAs on that show, and the crew on that show. And I learned a lot about how film is made, and I learned a lot about comedy writing because of it, because I spent a lot of time in the writers room when I was like 15, 16, and became good friends with all of them. So there was just really a lot of different pieces of what make TV and film that I ended up being exposed to by being on that show, along with just working with really funny, really great actors all the time. So I really appreciate the time that I spent on that show. And it was, what was weird is I feel like that show got way more popular after we were done working on it. It
I
had
agree.
such a weird secondary life where like I was about to graduate high school, and now all of a sudden it was on Nick at Night, which it didn't make sense that it was on Nick at Night, because Nick at Night is like actual shows from the 80s, but our show took place in the 80s. They're like, no one cares. Just put it on there. And and they put it on there, and all of a sudden, like way more people were watching it than on, it was on the CW, which just got bought again. Like the CW, that network is constantly in motion, I feel like. But yeah, so that was a really great time in my life. I am thankful I had that experience.
And in the middle of you filming Everybody Hates Chris, if I get the timeline right, you were cast as the voice of Phineas Flynn on Disney Channel's Phineas and Ferb, which is where our paths cross. But first, though, tell us about the audition process for Phineas. How did you get that role?
Yeah, when fate brought us together, and I had only worked on one other animated show when I worked on Phineas and Ferb, or when I booked Phineas and Ferb, rather. It was a pilot for Disney called Can You Dig It? It was like a 1970s pilot for Disney. Ironically enough, it was also a show that I worked on with Ashley Tisdale, who would then work with me on Phineas and Ferb as my sister.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have a lot of experience in animation at all, but I auditioned for it just kind of how I would any audition. It was just another thing that I went into the studio to record. And, you get a lot of auditions as an actor that you just never hear back on. You're just like, I guess I didn't get that. And pretty much a full on like 5, 6 months later, they called me. I was back in Florida. I wasn't shooting every It's Chris because we were off. We were on hiatus. And so I was back in Florida and I got a call from my agent about it. And they're like, hey, we think that you booked this Phineas and Ferb show. And I didn't even really remember fully what it was. I remember that I auditioned for it, but I was like, I don't remember the full context of like what my audition was. Can you send it to me because I'm not doing my own voice? I knew that because a lot of times I would like creating voices for my characters, even as a kid. That was just something I liked doing. So I was like, I need you to send me my audition so I know what they want. And when I did the pilot, which was, I believe, February 2006, which is crazy, it was like, hey, we're going to do the pilot. And they'd already casted an adult actor, a very good voice actor who works on a lot of stuff. He's super talented. They'd already cast someone. When they heard my audition, they were like, uh-oh, we think we need to read Vincent Martella. We like his voice a lot. And so they read me for it at Ideas. The very first time I recorded Phineas and Ferb was at the studio where we'd cross paths. And I guess pretty shortly into recording the pilot, they kind of both knew. They were the two creators of Phineas and Ferb were like, okay, we're going with Vincent. We're gonna test the pilot with him.
Now, how did the voice come about? I mean, did you create that voice, or did they say we're kind of looking for something like this and you had to mimic it? Where did that come from?
Yeah, no. So it's with animation. I don't know how many people who are voice actors you've had on your podcast before, but I'll kind of briefly go into like my process and my experience with it for your listeners, which is just a lot of times they give you a breakdown of the character, they give you the art, and that's what they did for Phineas. Was they described him as very outgoing, very excited, very imaginative, very creative, pretty much never upset, pretty much never negative, a very positive force. And so I wanted to do a voice that whenever you heard it, it would always make you smile because it's so happy. It would just always be this very, very happy voice. And that's what I landed on with Phineas's voice. Is I wanted something that just kind of always makes you giggle and makes you excited. And it would almost be weird to hear it upset. Like it would almost be like a weird voice to be like, oh no, not that, not him being sad. And it's probably only happened like 3 times, shows or movies that he's ever been sad or upset. So yeah, I went with that voice, and luckily the good folks behind the scenes who created the show loved it.
And so you kind of mentioned this. At this time, you were still living in Florida, but the show was being done out of California, which is how we met, as you mentioned. You recorded the vast majority of those lines, at least in the first few years, while I was working at Disney Ideas, which was part of on the backlot of what was then the Disney MGM Studios. So you did 130 episodes of Phineas and Ferb, plus dozens of other projects like spin-offs, movies, games. When you were cast as Phineas, did you ever imagine like this was going to become what it became? I mean, this was a huge thing and still is a huge thing for Disney Channel. How did the success of Phineas and Ferb change your life?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone involved in Phineas and Ferb thought that it would become what it has. It is definitely a once in a lifetime experience that I'm going to have now. What's been amazing is, as you said, I mean, it keeps finding ways to be in my life even after all this time. We just did a movie for Disney Plus that came out at the end of 2020. It has been the best job I've ever had, one of the best personal experiences I've ever had with all the different people that I've met. And as you said, recording the pilot at Disney Ideas, it's a very weird show when you just say what it is. Like when you're just like, oh yeah, it's every day of summer vacation. They build these inventions. They have a pet platypus. Sometimes he's a secret agent. They don't know about that though. And like if you just explain kind of the nuts and bolts of the show, it is so unique and so different. I knew it was going to be really funny because too something that the creators did, which was really helpful for me and really helpful for me in the early stages of doing Phineas and Ferb, was they actually sent me a VHS that was the full storyboard of the pilot. So it was all the art that they had in an animatic for the pilot, with Dan Povenmire doing all of the voices. You know, he was just or doing all the lines. You know, he was doing some of the voices a little bit different than his own voice, but he ends up playing Dr. Doofenshmirtz on our show. He's an awesome voice actor as well as, you know, writer. That was a really helpful tool to understand the tone of the show. It's just like, this is kind of the tone. This is the excitement levels. This is, you know, the style of comedy that we're going for. And that I think was really helpful to all the cast members to go, okay, this is what we're doing. And now let's kind of go on this adventure together and see if we can, you know, all bring what we have to that tone. Yeah, no one could have ever expected that it would still be so important to so many people, but it really does mean a lot to me, you know, just seeing the amount of kids who are now adults, you know, people who are my age even or a little bit younger who have kids now that they're showing it to, or it still means a lot to them. And, you know, there's still a presence in the parks sometimes. You know, they bring out, people have, you know, the t-shirts on when they walk around the parks and stuff. It's really special. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to work on something that you know is that influential again in my life, and I don't take it for granted. It's very cool.
Yeah, and it was always a great experience when at Ideas when we were doing it, because you know our scheduling manager Christine would get the call and say, Vincent coming in tomorrow, and everybody, you know, would have the stack. At that time it was all videotapes of things that you had to voice to, and I'm sure it wasn't this often, but it seemed like it was once a month. We were getting you in for a handful of episodes all the time, and everybody enjoyed it. It was a great experience for us too, because you know you were a younger kid at the time, and you were part of the family. I mean, and it drew a bunch of us into the series. I mean, I had a daughter that was in that age range anyway, but a lot of other people got interested in the whole show and the process during that time. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time at Ideas in Florida with you guys. It might have been more than once a month. It might have been twice a month. Because the way they had our schedule for a long time was I think every 2 weeks, like kind of like an every other week sort of thing.
Okay.
And we record usually 2 episodes and then do ADR. And I always loved something I loved when I was auditioning for Phineas and Ferb that kept being a thing as I worked on it was, you know, I auditioned for it at Disney Studios in Los Angeles. And when you walk around those studios, you get to see all the art on the walls and all the history there. And then when I started working on it at Ideas in Florida, your guys' studio had all this other history in it that, you know, all along the walls, you could see all the people who work there and everything like that. I remember thinking that was just the coolest thing in the world when I was a teenager. I was like, look at all these people who have recorded right here. Like, I'm right behind Disney World, and I'm just a Disney person in general. Like, I just love Disney anyways. And so just being like at that studio, you guys had that pool table that I would usually play like a round of pool with my dad when we were waiting to start, that purple pool table, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it was a really surreal thing that I got to be a part of. That was a cool studio.
Yeah, and it was great. I mean, we had your picture up on that wall, so you were walking down and seeing the other people that were working there, and then there was you. Now, somewhere in that range, you moved to LA. When was that in that process?
Yeah, so I was going back and forth for a while I was doing Everybody Hates Chris. So there were periods where I wasn't shooting at Ideas, and then I was coming back. And probably the last time that you guys had me there was probably like 2011, maybe early 2012, because that's when I fully moved to Los Angeles. I graduated high school. I think I went back one more time for a period of time to visit my family before they moved. And so I probably had, you know, one or two last, but that was Ideas had moved at that time. Ideas was no longer behind Hollywood Studios. You guys were in a different location.
Yeah, we had moved downtown.
That's right. It was downtown. And I only went to that studio a handful of times. I wasn't at that studio very long. But that's when I moved to Los Angeles, you know, permanently was probably, 2011 into 2012.
And now the flip side to all of this is that you had all this success before you were even 20 years old. You know, how important was your support system to get you through all of this? Because I'm sure you figured out that what you were doing wasn't a normal teenage life.
Yeah. It's something that I think that for me anyways, and I talked to other actors who had success when they were younger, is it's something that I feel like you don't understand it as much when it's happening, but then as you get distance from it, you go, oh, okay, like I understand like some of my experience was very different. And I think what was just helpful is having, a family who really supported me. They really supported what I wanted to do, and they supported that I was, pursuing something that I dreamt to do. I feel like they were that way with all my siblings in very different ways because we all kind of pursued different things. But on top of that, just having really good friends who were also in similar positions to me. And I feel like a lot of people who I worked with really wanted me to succeed. As you said, you guys welcomed me into your family at that studio, and people welcomed me into, different families at different studios I worked on. Like I said, I was, when I was 16, 17, I was hanging out with the writers on Everybody Hates Chris and becoming friends with them. So it always felt like a lot of people wanted me to be in positions to succeed where it was like, yeah, like we understand that you're a teenager, but we want you to not feel like you're alone in these circumstances that are all, adults. And, I feel like most people have the thought of what would it have been like if I just didn't do any of that stuff, and just had, completely normal high school experience or like college experience or whichever. But so many of the best things that kept giving me good experiences and have taught me so many things about not just the industry that I'm in, but just life itself because of all the different people that I've run into because of my career. It's kind of been priceless in a way. So I can't, I really can't think of I wonder what it would have been like different because my whole life would be different. I'd be a different person, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely a different experience, but I've been fortunate to only have a couple of not great experiences when working on something where I wasn't just really, really happy all the time to be able to do the thing that I care about doing. So yeah, overall, I worked with a lot of good people.
Yeah. Now, at the end of Phineas and Ferb, you were in a few episodes of The Walking Dead, which is pretty different than being Phineas Flynn. Was it a conscious effort to try and find something different than a kid's cartoon, or was that just a coincidence that you went from Disney Channel to The Walking Dead?
Yeah, there's a lot less like eating people's flesh in Phineas and Ferb. So there was definitely a departure for me. Yeah, no, I that wasn't an intentional thing. I was so excited when I got to work on Walking Dead. I was such a big fan of that show. Like I watched it every week. And to get to work on it, especially right there, like in the thick of, I feel like the popularity of it, I feel like right when it was just at the center of pop culture. I mean, everyone I knew watched The Walking Dead. And so that was just really, really cool. Being on a set that big that has that much money going into it is insane. I mean, the practical sets that they built are huge. The makeup is unlike anything you've ever seen, on any other set. I had a bunch of really surreal moments of working on that set where I was like, this is probably as close as I'm going to get to ever seeing like what this would really look like what this, what this apocalyptic zombie world is like. This is the best quality you could ever see this. This is at the height of it's all the best horror makeup, you're ever going to see and all the best sets. And it had so much, like I said, it had so much money behind it that the sets were massive and they were huge and the actors are all the best you're going to find. And so just being on that, I think I was in awe like every day I was on set, just being like, I can't believe they let me do this. Like, I can't believe they invited me to be on this like giant playground of zombie, adventure.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you do plenty of acting, but it seems not just with Phineas and Ferb, you still do quite a bit of voice and character, work. Is that on purpose, or is that just where your career is kind of taking you into the voiceover stuff?
I wouldn't say it's on purpose. I think it's just where my career went, and I really love making cartoons. If it was up to me, I want to work on a new different cartoon, doing a different voice, doing very very different characters every week if I could. I really really love it. It's a very freeing thing to be able to do creatively. You really do get a lot of rope when it comes to like, okay, go create this character, like really vocally, let's find what this guy sounds like or find what this creature sounds like. And then as for live action, I think it's just a matter of when I'm booking something live action and when I'm not. And in between, I've always worked on a lot of cartoons or video games and things like that. And so I'd be pretty content to keep working on as many cartoons as I could. I really do like I said, probably when I was, in high school and started taking it really seriously. When I was like, okay, I really care about this. I started doing voice lessons with like an opera coach, and wanted to really make sure I was always sounding my best when I would go do Phineas. Once that stuff becomes more important to you, and you really, try to focus on these auditions, your career just ends up drifting into a certain direction.
Well, and how much is it between learning the trade versus just kind of natural talent with voice acting? I mean, did you have to learn how to, like, you just broke into the Phineas voice a couple minutes ago like it was nothing, but like I couldn't do that. So is that a natural talent, or is that something you learn from coaching?
Yeah, it's a combination of things for sure, because some of it is just natural talent. Like there are things vocally that I certainly can't do that a lot of other voice actors, I'm blown away when I hear them do it. And then there's a matter of really working on it and honing your skill. I mean, I've I know sometimes I've been probably very annoying to live with for different roommates, or probably my family when I was younger. I was just walking around doing ridiculous voices for no reason, just because I think that they're funny, and just deciding to speak in a ridiculous accent or something, just because I'm amusing myself. And so I think it just has to do with, exploring like what your instrument has in it, like what are the highs, what are the lows, and
Hmm.
what can you do with all those things. I feel like you hear it a lot, and you can hear it in episodes of Phineas and Ferb with everybody, but you hear it a lot in even The Simpsons or Family Guy, or like any really famous animated show. You do hear the difference between where people start with their character and
Yes.
where they end up, because it's like the pocket of like, I can do everything with the voice when it's here though. I can sing, I can hit all the emotional things that I need to hit without it veering out of my character's voice. And that was something I learned too, where it was like, and this is actually the best space for Phineas to be in, so that he sounds the way he has to sound for all these different emotions, and to be able to yell, and to be able to withstand the hours in a booth without it destroying your
Hmm.
voice. So those are parts of the trade that you learn. Those are things that you learn, you figure out. I was at a Comic-Con last summer with Billy West, who's like one of the biggest voice actors ever. And I was talking to him about his experiences, things that he's learned, and he was just constantly telling me to create and keep trying new things, and the amount of voices that he does, it's mind blowing. I hope one day to have the amount of characters under my belt that some of these voice actors have, and just some of the new things that they learned, 10 years into their career, to go, oh, I'm going to use this for this next role. And so I have a lot to learn still, but it's definitely a combination of talent and things that you learn. My dog's going crazy. Sorry.
Okay.
He didn't like my
Now,
answer. He was like, that was a terrible answer, dude.
well, now, if with everything that you've learned, if you had to do Phineas Flynn over again, would you change anything?
No, no, I wouldn't. I'd keep it the same for sure. I love the roller coaster that was and has been working on Phineas and Ferb. I hope we get to keep bringing Phineas and Ferb content to people on Disney Plus. People really loved our movie, and we were really happy that people did. And so I don't think I'd change anything about that experience. Having anything in your life for as long as I've had Phineas and Ferb in my life is a long time. Like that's a
Hmm.
lot of time to be not just doing something career wise, but just even having a friend that long is a long
Right. Yep.
time.
You've had quite the
So
relationship with Phineas.
yeah, it's a very long time to have something involved in you. So it does mean a lot to me, and it always will. So I can't say I'd change anything that I was doing performance wise or vocally, because it all fed into what I learned and what I know now.
Yeah. So what else do you have going on these days? Where can people see or hear you or keep up on what you're doing?
Nothing. I'm a deadbeat. No, I'm just kidding. I just kind of hang out. No, what's great is there's a new show coming to Disney Plus called The Sheepyverse, and I worked on that show. I can't really provide the context of what I did on that show, but go watch it. It's super adorable. It's a younger show. It's like a younger kids show. And I also did an episode this last season of the show New Amsterdam. That was a live action show that I worked on, and I got to be extremely Italian on that show. It was very funny. I'm glad that they let me do what I got to do on that show. But I think it's on Hulu or Peacock now, because it just premiered recently. And yeah, people can follow my comedy that I do too, because I do sketch comedy, and I used to do it on stage all the time in New York. I've been living in New York for a couple of years, I just moved back to the West Coast this year, but before COVID, I would do a lot of live comedy, and I had a sketch group, and we would put on variety shows and sketch shows. But I still do that. Yeah, I'm always hopefully going to have new animated projects coming out. Is like I said, I'd work on them every week if I could, but right now, look out for the Chibiverse. That's the main next thing I can tell you guys to look out for.
Excellent. So, Vincent, my daughter watched Phineas and Ferb religiously when she was younger, and our son was born in the middle of Phineas and Ferb, and the stuffed animal that we brought to the hospital to be with him when he was born was our little Perry the Platypus, which he still has. And so Phineas and Ferb has been a huge part of our life, not to mention working at the studio where you recorded. So I really appreciate you taking the time to respond to my DM on Instagram and making the time to be on the Film Florida podcast. This was a lot of fun.
No, thank you so much for having me. That's a wonderful story. I had no idea about that. Yeah, no, we have such a specific history with one another that was so important to my life. It was those times of working at the studio with all of you. And so, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad I saw your message and we were able to do this. I'm like I said, I said this before we were rolling, but I'll say it for your viewers again. It's exciting to hear that people care so much about the film industry in Florida still, and want to learn more about it and learn more about the people who have worked on a lot of different projects in Florida and people from Florida. So this is really cool. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org or visit our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.22 for our 2022 fundraising campaign. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.